A number of years ago, Darrell Dorr had an experience that made John's words at the beginning of his gospel, "The light shines into darkness, and the darkness did not overcome it," take on new meaning for Darrell. He came to understand those words and their promise in a way he would never forget. Here is a portion of Darrell's story. Darrell was working on an oil rig in the Gulf of Mexico when suddenly it began to wobble, tipped to one side, and crashed into the sea. Darrell was trapped inside a small room in the oil rig. As the rig sank deeper and deeper into the sea, the lights went out and the room began to fill with water. Can you imagine how terrifying it must have been to have been trapped in a dark room filling with water as the oil rig was sinking to the bottom of the ocean? I put myself in that situation, I'd have been going totally crazy. I mean, both physically and in my head and heart. Thrashing about in the darkness, Darrell accidentally found a huge air bubble that was forming in the corner of the room. He thrust his head into the bubble. Then a horrifying thought sent a shiver down his spine. I'm buried alive. He assumed in the depths of the ocean it would take a long time before they'd ever find him, and there'd be no rescue possible. Darrell began to pray, and as he did so, something amazing happened. Darrell said, I found myself actually talking to someone. Jesus was there with me. There was no illumination, nothing physical, but I sensed him, a comforting presence. He was real. He was there. Now you might think Darrell was crazy, but if you read the Bible and do any reading outside the Bible, or listen to people who've had near-death experiences, you'll discover there are countless people throughout the ages, and still today, who have experienced the presence of Christ in inexplicable, yet powerful and comforting ways. I'm certain many of you have also heard or read stories about people who've experienced the presence of Christ. I've had a lot of people over the years, grandfathers and many, many others, tell me about strange experiences of a light, of presence, that bless them with comfort and hope during some very difficult times. Maybe some of you have even had those experiences. The presence of Christ provided Darrell with comfort as he waded in the cold darkness of the deep sea. He assumed that was where he would die. One agonizing hour after another passed until Darrell had been trapped for 22 hours. The oxygen supply inside the bubble was quickly giving out. Death was drawing near. Darrell knew it was just a matter of time. Then something remarkable happened. Darrell saw a tiny star of light, just a wee tiny star of light, shimmering in the pitch black water. He wondered whether it was real, or after 22 hours he was beginning to hallucinate because the oxygen was starting to disappear. Darrell squinted his eyes. The light seemed to grow brighter. He squinted again. Darrell wasn't hallucinating. The light was real. It was coming from a diver's helmet. Someone had found him. His 22-hour nightmare was over. Rescue had come. He was saved. What a remarkable experience. Can you even begin to imagine how terrifying it would be to spend 22 hours trapped in the cold darkness of the deep sea, assuming you would die right there? As terrible as the darkness of the sea must have been, I would imagine that the darkness of despair must have been even worse. The fear that no one was coming and that he would die alone in that darkness. I can't begin to imagine the emotions and feelings he must have experienced over those 22 hours. When was the last time you experienced the terror of that deeper darkness? The darkness of despair that can often clutch at our hearts, leaving us feeling utterly alone in the midst of our struggle. That feeling that there's just no hope, and it's just going to keep being this way. It's that darkness, the deep darkness of the soul, to which John refers as the enemy of light. The darkness to which John refers is not the absence of light, but the absence of love, hope, and the presence of God. It's the darkness to which many saints, including Mother Teresa, you all know about Mother Teresa, have referred to as the dark night of the soul. That sense of being all by oneself, of being abandoned even by God. Mother Teresa, in a letter to Reverend Michael Vanderpeet, once wrote, "Jesus has a very special love for you. As for me, the silence and the emptiness are so great that I look and do not see, listen and do not hear." Mother Teresa describes the terrible darkness Jesus endured on the cross when he cried out, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Almost all the things we hear about Mother Teresa or have in the past are always positive about her faith and her love and all those good things. But if you ever read her writings, she had that deep darkness in her soul that just gnawed and clutched at her. It was just horrible for her. It just wouldn't go away. That deep darkness comes in many forms: depression, grief, broken relationships, financial struggles, illness, spiritual struggles, death, and despair. Some seem blessed to be spared those dark moments. They just never seem to have to struggle with them. Others know them all too well. When they come, they can leave us feeling like Daryl, utterly alone in the deep, cold darkness of our despair. Do you understand what I'm talking about? Have you ever experienced the terror of that deeper darkness, the darkness of despair, that can clutch at our hearts, leaving us feeling utterly alone in the midst of our struggles? Have you ever experienced the dark night of the soul? Have you ever felt like love, hope, or even God had left forever? I'm certain many of you know what I'm talking about. It's part of our human experience. While the darkness in our lives can be cold and deep, the good news today that John announces as we celebrate the second Sunday of Christmas and prepare for Epiphany is the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness does not overcome it. The darkness of our despair is filled with the light of hope, love, peace, and all those blessings God desires for us. John boldly declares that in spite of the darkness that's always present in our lives, the light of love, hope, and the presence of God continue to shine, sometimes dimly, like Daryl's first glimpse of the diver's light, at other times with a brilliance that's blinding. The good news today and every day is that Christ is not with us just in those moments filled with joy, but also in those times of deep, cold darkness, those times when we feel all alone and God forsaken. There have been so many like Daryl who have been blessed with powerful experiences of Christ's presence in the midst of their darkest moments. In spite of the darkness Mother Teresa experienced, she also experienced the light of Christ that shines throughout the universe to cast out the darkness. In Mother Teresa's words, Christ in our hearts, Christ in the poor we meet, Christ in the smile we give, and in the smile we receive. Notice where Mother Teresa experienced Christ. In spite of her struggles, Christ in our hearts, Christ in the poor we meet, Christ in the smile we give, and in the smile we receive. Like that deep darkness, the light of Christ's presence comes in many forms. A word of scripture, a verse of a hymn, a sip of wine or bit of bread, the care of a friend, or that mysterious presence of Christ. Whatever its form, the light of Christ continues to shine in our lives to provide us with love, hope, and reassurance of God's presence. We have a vase of flowers. This is going to make me cry, okay? I've been a little touched lately. We have a vase of flowers up there today in memory of Tammy's mom. And most of you know that she lived with us for about 3 years at the end of her life. She had Lewy body, which is a form of dementia that's like having Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, and it's really, really bad. And toward the end of her life, it just took everything away. her ability to take care of herself physically, even her ability to talk and express herself, which had always been very important to her. And I can remember one morning I was getting her ready. Occasionally we would take her to adult daycare up at Friendship Haven when both of us had to be at work and couldn't be there with her. And I was getting her ready, and getting her ready was not an easy thing to do because she couldn't help herself at all. And we had a daily routine, and it worked well. And at that point, she couldn't walk anymore, and pretty much I had to lift her to get her into the van. And I remember getting her into the van, and I lifted her and got her in the van. It was never easy to do that. I mean, it was just a hard thing to do. And as I got her into the seat, I was getting ready to close the door, and she said, "Just a minute." And I said, "Did I hurt you?" And she looked at me and she said, "No, I love you." And it's one of the most touching moments of my life. No, I love you. Right in the midst of that darkness and despair. And she hated what she was going through so much because she was always an independent woman who took care of herself and others. And it was hard on all of us emotionally to take care of her in a situation like that. And yet, in the darkness of all of that, that light of Christ's love shone through her. Mother Teresa knew it well. You care for people out of your love for them, and that love returns manyfold. The light no darkness can overcome, not even death and despair. When was the last time you experienced the light of Christ in your life? A light that filled you with the sense of love, hope, and the presence of Christ, even in the midst of one of your deepest, darkest moments. The light comes in many forms: a word of scripture, a verse of hymn, a sip of wine or a bit of bread, the care of a friend, or that mysterious presence of Christ that flows through all of us. If you're struggling with darkness in your life, if you feel alone and afraid, if despair is clutching at your heart, like Daryl and Mother Teresa, hang on, pray, and know that the light of Christ is shining right now, however dimly, to fill your hearts with love, hope, and the comfort of God's presence. May the light of Christ fill your hearts with love, hope, and the comfort of God's presence, now and all the days of your lives. Amen.